And in the background, you can't hear it?
Nope, not at all.
Sweet, because it's warm in here. Um, I know you're no stranger to that. What episode is the 24?
22, 23,
Do you know? 24. Yeah,
24.
24. 24. Yep. The endings, top five endings was 23. Wowzers. Okay. Um, Welcome to That's a Wrap, episode number 24.
Oh,
Today we're talking about.
go ahead, Eric. Go
Uh,
ahead and do that
yep,
again.
yep, no problem. Welcome to That's a Wrap, episode number 24. Today we're talking about Slava Zizek's Pervert's Guide films, Pervert's Guide to the Cinema and Pervert's Guide to Ideology. And we're going to talk about Room 237, a film about theories about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And today, instead of doing a segment one and segment two, we're going to lump them together because we both feel that they're pretty closely, how should I put it, related in a certain way in terms of theme, because they're both about interpretation and analysis in certain ways. And so we thought we'd discuss them together. Chris is not with us, but I am Eric Marshall.
And I am Nick Schlegel.
Yeah, Chris Gullen is away for this episode. He'll be back next time. And so you just get me and Nick today. And let's start off with some pickups. So what is up with you, Nick?
Whoa. I would say more than the last couple times we've done pickups where it's been sort of, ad hoc answers. Oh, this, that, and the other. Definitely, I would say my latest news is that I'm writing full time right now. The spring term ended. And those of us in academia um, often find themselves sort of unemployed for a small portion of the year. And, you just try and 7 or 8 weeks and you just do you try and save up for it and stuff like that. It's not like it's very easy to go get another job and then just leave it in a little over a month. But so we always know that this time is coming and try to be as most productive as we can. Well, in this case, since I've got a book under contract that needs, finishing. That's what I've been doing. I've been writing 6 days a week. Really seven. I get to that seventh day and I'm like, I can't really just stop writing. It just keeps coming, and it's going really good. I'm writing some good things and exploring some stuff, and I've got a decent chunk to add to this book. There's a whole chapter that needs to be done, completed, that I haven't even started yet. So I mean, that's um, the bulk of what I need to do is in that unwritten chapter. But it's not a particularly long chapter. It's probably going to be between 25 and 30 pages, so it's not going to be that difficult. The other things are just like, whoa, like getting the images and writing the captions and putting the index together and proofreading and acknowledging all the front matter. And, there's just a lot that goes into it. And so your mind is constantly on the project. And then I sort of balance that with sort of meditational work around the house, just keeping it up and going outside and doing work around there. And um, that's about all I can really say regarding pickups. Is my life has been just writing, and that's good, Eric. It's
Yeah.
nice to, even though I'm um, sort of actively trying to leave this profession. It's nice to um, it's nice to leave this for posterity. To have a book done out there. Like all those years of hard work with the dissertation and so on and so forth, and all the energies that were put into that will sort of coalesce, and it's done. It's out
Yeah, that's great, man. That's very, very good news. It's good to hear. You're like, that's all. That's all I have to say. It's like, what do you mean that's all? That's amazing. It's really big, man. I think as academics, like, summer and and the other breaks are the times to write, to get your publications done and stuff like that. And I think every break and every summer, in the recent past, I've said, okay, this is the time I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, and I always end up not doing it, right?
there.
And for me
What
this
is it?
summer, Well, I mean that's always the excuse, right? But this summer actually is an exception. This summer's different for both of us, I think. I always get the impression maybe you're just you're just a good con man and you're fooling me, but I always get the impression that you're much more organized than I am, which isn't hard to do because I'm very disorganized.
No, I'm
And
pretty disorganized.
well, you wear it well, I guess. But but I'm very disorganized. You should see my desk right now. But I've been writing as well. But we're doing different types of writing, different types of work at the moment, right?
Mhm.
And what a lot of people don't maybe don't understand is that we're both in contingent positions as teachers, as educators. So we get paid per semester, we get appointed per semester, and it's not a full-time tenure track gig, which would change things, I think, for us
Sure.
both economically at the very least.
There's no real
Uh,
salary. It's just as you know, it's sort of it's just guns for hire every 4 months.
exactly, and that's true of 80% of the workforce in academia right now. We're not the exceptions to that rule. We're more the rule at this point. And so for summer, it can be. I remember a couple summers ago, I waited tables for the summer. This summer, I was able to save enough. I have my tutoring business, which helps and stuff like that. But that's what people don't understand. But you're doing an academic work. I'm writing more personal stuff. I've got a memoir that I am almost finished with. I'm in the
Uh-huh.
final draft stage, and I've got a novel that I'm going to be revising in July and August. And it's funny, Nick. I've been going through these, and I decided to write the a couple months ago. I decided to write the fiction under a pen name and write the nonfiction under my real name, my passport name, as they call it.
Uh-huh.
And as I'm editing this memoir, I'm thinking about
Reversing it.
flipping it. Yeah, because the stuff. Who cares about the novel? It's just fiction. But the memoir is very personal, and there's some stuff in there that I mean, I don't. I'm very nervous writing it. I'm going to put it out. I'm going to do it anyway. It's a memoir about graduate school. I think
Hmm.
there's a significant portion of our audience that would be very interested in it. Actually,
Yes.
it's about my time in graduate school, kind of my journey to becoming a writer, which is what I've always wanted to do. And I'm not committing to leaving the academic profession. I do like teaching, but I need to, as you do, I think we all need to figure out what else we can do. What is our plan B? Maybe it becomes a plan A. Things like that, because we can't count on tenure track positions. We can't count on anything, so we need to figure other stuff out. And I've always wanted to be a writer, and this is my journey through graduate school to becoming a writer, and how graduate school helped, but also very much hindered my progress as a writer.
Right.
And it's good, but there's a lot of personal stuff in there, a lot of kind of embarrassing personal stuff. It's very revealing. So if anybody wants to
The dirty tell-all of Eric Marshall.
Yeah, and it's not what you expect either. It's not all sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, there's some sex, there's some drugs, there's not a lot of rock and roll, but it's not. And I think with an academic or graduate school perspective, you always expect, oh, I did all this work and then my advisors stole my research. That didn't happen to me, and I don't know very many people that did happen to. It's not like that, but it's not like an expose of graduate school. It's a very personal thing. So, if anybody wants a sneak preview of it, I'm going to be searching for beta readers, people who might want to, take a early look at it and give me some feedback. You can email me at eric@ericmarshall.net, ERIK@ericmarshall.net, and get on my list and
I am looking forward to reading it. I was wondering if you do have sort of like a pseudonym for me in there, or am I mentioned at all, or
I've changed some names, but not all.
okay.
And but I don't know if you're not really a big player in it, unfortunately.
No,
Not yet anyway. So
I was quietly supporting in the background.
yeah, and that's why you're not in it. You're so quietly supporting, right? You're just kind of there. You'll be in the acknowledgments, of
Mm.
course,
We
but
had some good times. We sure
we
did.
did have some good times, and you've been very actually helpful. Not just socially, but academically. You've read a lot of my stuff, my
Oh, vice
academic
versa.
work, and helped me with my dissertation and all that stuff.
Same here.
So
Same
yeah,
here. Yeah, you
so,
can't make it through grad school without, what masters you can, sure. I mean, masters is when you're doing a masters, it seems like very hard work. And it's not until you
well,
actually take the plunge to the PhD where you find out that the masters was just a very, actually simple dress rehearsal to see whether or not you could, you had the stomach for it. Uh, and you just can't make it through either of those without the support of friends. It's impossible. I really do think it's impossible. You'll quit.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I actually stopped I skipped the masters. I went straight from bachelor's to PhD, so I
Okay.
didn't have that staging ground, and kind of wish I had. I
You
mean,
would
if
have
I
had
had,
both, yeah. You just had all the extra credits and work piled onto your PhD.
yep, exactly, exactly. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. I'm hoping to have that um, in a presentable form by next week, and then out by maybe August or September. So that'll be
Right
good.
on. I've just yeah, I would say as two addendums. One would be um, the other thing that's challenging about the academic book is, of course, is the images. Trying to find
Mhm.
high res scans, and of course, getting the permissions from the people that are providing them for you. I'm using lobby cards and stills, publicity stills, and posters and stuff like that. So it's not really none of that's really copywritten. However, um, whatever I didn't buy while I was in Madrid from the Ministry of Culture and the Filmoteca have been supplemented to me by other sources in Madrid. So it's a lot of work getting all the images together, and making sure that each chapter has supportive images, so that when you're writing about the aesthetics of something, it certainly helps if people can see them. Like
Yeah,
you
especially with your field because a lot of those films are not very well known. It'd be nice
hmm
to see them.
exactly. And the second addendum I was going to say is I actually wanted to add a honorable mention to our favorite endings of all time. The
Okay.
classic endings.
Yeah.
It came to actually two movies came to me as I was going to bed like a couple nights afterwards, and I'm like, oh, I gotta mention those in the next pickups,
Hmm.
but I forgot one. Uh, and then like a couple days later, I'm like, wait a minute, what was that other one? And I remembered it again, and then I forgot it again. And so I don't know, man, it's like old age. And but the one I did remember, and if the other one ever comes back to me, I'll mention it. But the one that I did remember and I wanted to add in the honorable mention would be, without doubt, the ending to Midnight in Paris.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yep,
All right.
the bridge. That's
Hmm. Yeah.
that's pretty much all I'm going to say. In
Yeah,
case
it's a
people
good ending. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that it's sort of like it's the perfect little button at the end of that film. It just puts a big smile on my face, and um, this is one I can do spoiler free. It's just that
Yeah.
it's one of my. I just love that ending. Woody Allen's sensibility as a director and writer are all over that scene. Like they're in all of his scenes, but that
Yeah.
one in particular is sort of summarizes him quite well.
It's a really good ending for sure. It's funny that we're talking so much about graduate school today, and we're talking in principal photography about Zizek,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is somebody you cannot avoid in graduate school, right?
Mm-hmm.
To an extent. I don't know if you watch the through the credits of the Pervert's Guide to Ideology, but that might go on to my favorite endings.
Oh no, I didn't.
it's
Like
so,
Netflix
it's
has this
really
thing now
funny.
where like it makes a
Yeah,
window out of what it is you're currently watching,
yeah,
and then it says coming up next, and it just pops up to the next
yeah.
movie.
I was
And
told to watch through the credits, and so I clicked on back onto the box so I could see it. But
oh
it's
shit, all
it's
right,
it's
well,
hilarious, man. But I won't even give it away.
outtakes or something like that.
It's one stupid little like outakey kind of scene, but it's really funny. so those of you who watch it, you should watch through the credits on Netflix. So I won't give it away. You can go watch it on your own. It won't add to the discussion for you to know it. Let me tell you. So
Well, when we
it's
finish
just
up,
stupid.
I'll definitely get up and watch it.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, let's move into principal photography.
Let's go.
All right. Doom, 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 so here we are, principal photography, Zizek and room 237. We should maybe give a quick overview, maybe of Slavoj Žižek, and maybe of psychoanalytic film theory, and maybe of cultural studies. Maybe that's too broad, but for people who are like, what is all this? What is this Zizek thing? Um, and I'm not sure that I'm prepared to do that, but I mean, actually I am. So for those in the know, those who have gone through grad school and read Zizek, they kind of know his shtick. But for those of you who are kind of more general listeners, Slavoj Zizek is a Slovenian-born cultural theorist, and he's kind of a intellectual rock star. He's the one that a lot of people go to for mostly film analysis, but cultural analysis in particular. And he's made these two movies doing basically film analysis, film ideological criticism, and things like that. And he's charismatic in his own ways. When you watch the movie, you'll
That's a
see
good
he's
way to
this
put it.
like, yeah, he's like this big bearded kind of guy with this thick accent. Um, but he's very energetic. I went to see him once back in, I believe it was 2000. It
Was it
might have been.
online or
No, it
in
was at U of
Toronto?
M.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 1999, I believe, actually, and it was. I went to see a talk he was giving at the. It was in the. It wasn't the business school. I can picture the building, but I
Hmm.
can't remember what department it was at the moment. But it was a fairly large lecture hall, and I got there right around on time, maybe a little early, and it was already full, and they had overflow, and they had put a monitor on the outside in the hall so we could watch on the monitor, and I could kind of, since I'm fairly tall, I could kind of peek in, over people and see him from time to time. And I
I
remember he
could be
was,
wrong, but I think he might have already had that one smaller movie out at that point. Zizek, just that one. Remember that one?
he might have, yeah, he
Might have
might
been
have,
last support of that. Who knows?
yeah. Well, he
I'm
was,
not sure though.
yeah, I don't know either, but he was talking about The Mask, the Jim Carrey movie, and there is
Yeah.
something, some other stuff. I don't really remember the gist of it because it was, kind of difficult. But yeah, even then he was, filling rooms, which is, for an academic, that's pretty huge, Um, but
I
go
was gonna
ahead.
say, and sometimes that and predictably, I've encountered a backlash against Zizek by academics who feel
Yeah.
that he's sort of like squandered his intellectual um, agility and acuity by becoming the pop star, and so
That's interesting.
on Facebook, I've seen people sort of like deride him. I
Mm.
don't know if it's out of jealousy
Hmm.
or you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
kind of I've noticed that uh, I've just noticed that over the years, and there seems to be a correlation between his rising capital as an academic rock star and his sort of credibility with other
Yeah,
intellectuals.
I think that's pretty common. I mean, there are some valid criticisms to lay at his feet for
Sure.
sure, but on on academic or intellectual grounds. But I found, and this is going to sound pretty harsh maybe and cynical, but I found that anytime an academic tries to break into the public realm, the public intellectualism, there's always a contingent of people who want to drag them back down.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
this very hermetic kind of feel to academia, and I think a lot of that is born out of jealousy.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it's kind of protective instinct, in
Yeah.
a certain way because
Intellectualism.
yeah, it's always made me crazy because I've always myself strived to be some sort of public intellectual. I think that
Hmm.
that role in the society has disappeared to a
Disappeared.
large extent. Either you're you know, if you're intellectual, you're academic, and if you're academic, you're inaccessible,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And there's no middle ground anymore. Like I feel like there might have been in the say the 50s, in the 60s. Maybe I'm romanticizing that period a little bit, but that's always been my feeling, and I've always wondered. It's always puzzled me why academics can't write more accessibly or don't write more accessibly
Hmm.
for the most part. And not to say Zizek's writing is incredibly inaccessible. It's
Oh,
it's
it's incredibly
oh
dense,
it's
and
it's
that's why the movie. I think that's why we're talking about them today is
Mhm.
because they're they're also dense because
Yeah,
typically Zizek will start. I mean, when we start talking about the movies, they've got this hook of placing him into the scenes of films and talking directly to the camera
yeah,
and
yeah,
sort of reinterpreting them on theoretical level. But um, they always start off accessible whenever he's talking about something. He sort of like he goes into lecture mode, and
hmm,
for about the first minute of whatever he's talking about, you're with him,
yeah,
and then at some point, I think he the audience, a mainstream audience without much of a background in cultural studies will sort of fade off a little bit, And then even
Uh,
I fade off at some point because, and all I'm saying is that I've gone to graduate school and I have read a lot of Zizek and
mhm.
do know the vocabulary that he's using. And even I sort of like, he'll lose me at many points during the film because I'll be like, oh, great point, Slavoj. Oh yeah, that's good. Oh, nice connection. Wait a minute, what the fuck?
What? Yeah, I'm the same way, and I'm the same way. Yeah, I think part of his popularity is he's coming from a materialist slash Marxist kind of point of view.
Mhm.
I think that hits a nerve with a good nerve with a lot of people. I think a lot of people like him because of that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, most of the time when he goes on a segment, he'll go on. It's a pretty long analysis,
Mhm.
and you're right. First couple of minutes, like, yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, cool. What?
What?
So, and I'm well versed in Marxist, ideological criticism and theory, and psychoanalytic theory, and I've read my Lacan, all that stuff, and even I'm like, what? But it's harder to listen to than it is to read in some ways. Although reading it's no picnic, but you're right. There's this weird kind of dichotomy almost with him where his language is extremely dense in his writing, but he's still somehow occupying this almost public intellectual kind of thing, mostly through these movies, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I
And we
think
should
you're
probably
absolutely
start
right.
off by talking about the big bomb, the atomic bomb that many, I mean, that the at SCMS and other conferences in 2006 when Pervert's Guide to Cinema came out, many people listed it in their sort of top 10 wish list type things that, oh my God, thank God somebody, and thankfully it was Zizek, came out with a documentary that sort of intersects theory and film analysis. And interestingly, you know, like you said, through a sort of neo-Freudian, sort of like Lacanian, new Lacanian, framework. So in other words, it brings psychoanalysis into it. It also brings Marxism into it, right? And so Freud and Marx were never exactly compatible theories, and yet he collapses them down into accessible, um, somewhat accessible visual demonstrations through these films. And it came out, and I was, it was, enraptured by it. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Remember, we had copies of it, and we were giving them to each other and watching it
Mm-hmm.
and loving it. And there's this, and I went so far. In fact, we talked about this on a previous episode. I went so far as to show portions of it here and there to certain classes. Not so much intro to film like Chris had talked about, which I thought was a bit much. But it's interesting. Just 2 weeks ago, you'll find this is great, Eric. A former student of mine needed a room to screen his film that he had just made. A Wayne State student, and so they needed a faculty member there, to be representative, because it was after hours on a Friday night and so on and so forth. So I said I'd be happy to, and I went there. And a student of mine from 2007 or 8 came up to me, Matt Kurtz, and I hadn't seen him. It's a long time ago, and that was for television criticism. And he said, "What was the name of that thing that you showed us where the dude's in the boat talking about plays?" And
Yeah.
I was like, Zizek's Pervert's Guidance. He's like, yes, that's it. He's like, oh my God, I've been searching for that ever since. And I thought this is hilarious because we talked about this as our next podcast. And I said, I'm going to have to bring this up. And I said, I said, your timing is great, Matt, because, he's got a new one out on Netflix, Pervert's Guide to Ideology, the sequel, in 3D, with naked cheerleader in the background, you know, and then, so I saw it on. We became Facebook friends, and then like about a week later, it's like Matthew was watching Pervert's Guide to Ideology, and I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. But I guess the point I was trying to make is that I showed it in TV Crit, not so much intro to film because they're already um a little bewildered by some of the stuff you're doing, and I think Zizek would be a rabbit hole of. But I may retract that statement when we start to talk about the opening segment to Pervert's Guide to Ideology. I think that could be shown in any class where you're doing any type of intro to film analysis.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that just any random viewer coming to his work is going to be a little baffled.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it's hard to say, and I've shown parts of it to film classes, intro film classes as well, and yeah, they're pretty much lost for the most part. What saves Zizek's films in some ways from the heavy jargon is the visual stuff. He just to give the view the listeners a sense, he puts himself into scenes from the movies basically, right? So they recreate sets or do like green screen where he the lecture part where he's talking about it, it looks like he's in on the set, which is
The latest one that had me the hardest was him on the floating piece of wood in Titanic. Was
well, then you absolutely have to watch the end of after the credits because it has to do with that Titanic stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and that
Yeah.
Titanic analysis was just spot on. And actually, I was like, I was cheering for Zizek because I am the only guy I know that champions that movie
Mm,
for certain reasons. I don't champion it for its love story or some of its sort of like incredulous dialogue. But I champion it from different points of view. And and so was Zizek, sort of
mhm.
like through an ideological framework, and he was having a real good time. I thought that what an interesting concept. I'm sorry we're getting a little sidetracked here, but while I'm talking about it, I should say that I thought it was absolutely fascinating that the reading that he was doing of that film. I mean, there's always that sort of like very basic, almost primitive class association reading of the film.
Right.
The tears of the Titanic associated with the classes of the people and so on and so on, all the way down to the rats. But the way he was talking about how the sort of like aristocracy and upper classes use the lower classes to sort of heal themselves and make themselves feel better about things and then discard them, let them sink to the bottom of the ocean. I
Mhm.
thought was, absolutely not without a tremendous amount of merit.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, when he first started in the Titanic section, I was like, this is kind of obvious, because it goes along with that same class. But then he goes into, like you said, the rest of it, where it's just kind of keeping them around to feel better and then discarding, right, for whatever reason. So, yeah, I agree. Um,
He's because he talks about how the love affair fades and what we're left with is the sort of like the aftermath after image of the events, and that's what he pulls
yeah.
from them, and how that's like the ultimate Hollywood film. And it's cool, man. In fact, I think I wrote down. He says that her ego's in distress, and DiCaprio helps her to reconstitute her image.
Right, right.
That was great.
Yeah, that's that's good stuff for sure. Yeah, I was definitely entertained watching this latest one. The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, I think, is pretty. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's straightforward. I mean, they're kind of the. It's just this is just an extension of that, I
Yeah,
think, right? It's
yeah,
called The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, but it's really the same type of criticism, and it's always film. It's all film. He
yeah.
talks
Even more
about
ideological than the previous film, which was all ideological as well. I mean,
yeah,
they're just different names to do the same thing.
right, right, exactly, and he's probably just trying to capitalize, haha, on the brand of the Pervert's Guide, right? Same
Right.
title, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, in this one he talks about yeah, he talks about so much Clockwork Orange and Taxi Driver and Last Temptation of Christ and Titanic and Full Metal Jacket. There's a bunch of other stuff.
Cabaret and
Cabaret, yeah,
Jaws
and
and They
Jaws, yeah,
Live. And yeah, he starts off with
yeah.
They Live. I
Yeah,
mean,
let's talk about that because I think that's a good opening for the movie. To be honest with
it's
you,
a
I think
great opening.
it really grabs you, and I know that you have some history with that movie,
Sure.
um, in terms of like, showing it to classes or just knowing it really well. But I
Yeah,
thought it
never
was a
showed it to a
good.
class, but just
Oh,
know it
okay,
really well. Yeah.
okay, yeah, and he starts off with "They Live" and talking about the glasses, that show,
Right.
the guy
John Carpenter's
what's really going
vision,
on.
in case people don't know, a sort of
Yeah.
very strong mid to late '80s film from Carpenter towards the sort of end of his really productive era.
hmm
That many people always thought was a pretty much a little unsung masterpiece. You've seen it, Eric, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I saw it as a 17 or 18-year-old and loved it because it was, it was Roddy Piper and the fight sequences and
I know.
but
Rowdy Roddy Piper.
the older you get, even at that age, it's very political. But I mean,
Yeah.
as you get older, you start to see just how political it is, and yeah, you're right. I mean, that opening where he talks about the glasses just being truly the ideology glasses, it's sort of like
Mhm.
blind dictates of consumerism and capitalism as your economic base, what the glasses function as. And it would, if you're gonna, I guess that's earlier when I said I might retract what I was going to say. That would be when I do a segment on ideology, it would be wonderful to start the first 5 minutes of class by showing that, because that would just prime the pump so perfectly.
Yeah, I think yeah, I agree completely. And the idea of the glasses as a metaphor, because one of the challenges I have teaching and even just talking to people is when you do analysis or interpretation or criticism, a lot of times that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to uncover ideology that was here theretofore invisible, right? And the idea behind ideological criticism in part is that the dominant ideology in which we kind of live and breathe is invisible to us. And in our case that's capitalism, and that's why a lot of this film is all about kind of the dictates of capitalism and things like that. But it's so hard to make that leap for a lot of people to say, look, there are, you live by a set, we all live by a set of values and and thoughts and things like that, mores or whatever, that are that we look at as natural, which are not natural, and there are ways to see these through culture, through language, and through other things. And the glasses and they live is a great metaphor for that. There's this, like, that's what ideological criticism does. It tries to show you, like, kind of what's behind all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That might be a good way to to introduce that concept. Because um, a lot of times, and we'll get to this when we talk about Room 237 probably, but a lot of times when you start doing criticism of any sort, any kind of analysis, especially with novices, you always get that. Aren't you overanalyzing this?
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's just a movie, right?
Right.
And you get that all the time, of course, and that's a good way to kind of explain it, And we'll talk, of course, more about that when we get to Room 237. I think, I imagine,
Yeah.
since
Oh
we
yeah.
haven't talked about it yet, but yeah,
That is
um,
the mantra of that movie. Jeez.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, some of the things he brings up in this, he talks about. Oh gosh, I don't even know where to go. Some of the interesting things to me, like the whole towards the end of the movie, he talks about the big other. This thing to which or for which we maintain appearances, and it's a capital O other. It's a Lacanian concept, um, and he goes on doing this Lacanian kind of read of the big other. We don't do things for an authority, but for an imagined authority, for
Right.
somebody. Even if it's our peers or people that we think are better than us, and then he kind of crushes it and says, "But there is no big other. We are alone."
Yeah.
And
That's really
and through
nice
his
too.
yeah, yeah. So he does what you think might be a predictable kind of analysis, and then he kind of sideswipes it a little bit, and he's like, we're alone, there is no big other, but it's all imaginary constructs. And I think that's great, and he talks about that when he's talking about Titanic actually a little bit,
That's
but
right.
also Last Temptation of Christ. And he talks a lot about like
That's right.
the Stalinist period and stuff like that. And yeah, it's I think that's a fascinating concept.
It
And then
really is.
mhm,
He marries that big other, I think, with a lot of his another branch of the ideological, which is the military.
yeah,
And right before we get into that big other portion of the documentary, we spend a good while on like Full Metal Jacket,
yes,
talking about the sort of the obscenity and the rituals that are drilled into the cadets, um, and then what should happen when we start paying too much attention to the strict rigidity of it all. So he talks about how if it's just nothing but the super ego, our constant moral watchdog, and guilt engine speaking to us, then we have the situation where there's the breakdown of reality, the killing of the drill sergeant, and then the suicide,
hmm,
because
yeah,
it's the he talks about the fine line between um, that is not simply just he's talking about this is my rifle, this is my gun, or all the other
you're right.
obscenities they do when they're marching. He's like that sort of like childishness is what keeps the superego in check with all the military authoritarian um, ideology, essentially, right? So I thought that was fascinating too, and a great place to go when he started talking about the big other. I know when what's the other thing? That's the other term he oh I forgot. He's like when with something of the distance ironical distance, or what does he call it? The it's an
Oh,
Italian term, I think. It's
yeah, and I'm not remembering it. There is it has to do with distance.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Once
yeah.
that distance collapses, and then it's nothing but the superego, no ego or id keeping it in check. Then you have like the scenes you see in towards the end of the first half of Full Metal Jacket. But of course, Full Metal Jacket. I'm not sure if you're aware. This was all about sort of like the Native Americans.
Don't even start, man. Don't even start. We're not there yet. We're not
Yeah,
there
with
yet.
the yeah, with the dining.
It's foreshadow. Nick is foreshadowing. For those of you who haven't seen Room 237, that's hilarious. Yeah, some of the other things he says, he talks about Taxi Driver, and he equates it to the Oslo killer, who has this long manifesto that he wrote in reaction to global capital, and he says that Travis Bickle is doing the kind of the same thing in a way. It's this, and those are I think pretty traditional, not traditional, but pretty straightforward readings of those.
What about that
But
like that bird's eye view of him on Travis's bed,
yeah,
staring up at him,
yeah, I know. Yeah,
constantly fanning his feet too. It's like I had a hard time looking at his face. Keep his feet still. They're like
so fun.
constantly. He's like wiggling his toes the whole time. And I'm like looking at his face, but then there's something in my peripheral vision. I'm like, would you keep your feet still so I can pay attention to what you're saying?
That's hilarious. That's really funny. Uh, some of the non-film things. Well, I don't know if it's talking about. He talks about the band Rammstein.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
this. I noticed a move he makes in a couple different places in that part of the film because he talks about Rammstein, and that's the German band who I don't know, they're popular probably in the probably early 2000s, I guess.
that's my guess.
Um, yeah, that du hast mich, or whatever like that. I liked them back in the day, but anyway, he talks about them taking on elements of Nazism in their stage presence. You know, they have the dark clothes and the boots and all that stuff,
Mm.
but they don't. But their lyrics are not about Nazism, and they don't seem to endorse Nazism. And his kind of thesis there is that they're undermining Nazism by appropriating its images. They're undermining it from within. They're emptying it of any kind of meaning in a certain way. And that's when he segues into the Titanic, talking about the rich kind of appropriating the vitality of the poor, and so that they can then discard them. And later on, he talks about religion, and he talks about Osama bin Laden, and this idea that, like, he says, if you're an instrument of God, like Osama bin Laden claimed to be, he says, he says that narrow moral terms are ridiculous. Like, there's no reason to even talk about morality if you're an instrument of God, because everything you do will be automatically moral, or it'll be, because there's no sense of even thinking about it, right?
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting point. And then he relates that to Stalinism, like the communism in the Stalin era, and Stalin's Stalinist communism, basically. And so it's not just capitalism that gets it. He goes on the other side too, but then that's when he starts talking about this big other, right? And then he segues into the Last Temptation of Christ, where he talks about at the end of that film. Those of you, I don't know, I'm assuming a portion of our audience has seen Last Temptation of Christ, but it's he dies on the cross, but there's no real resurrection or anything like that. So what he says about that is that what dies on the cross is the big other, the idea that we need to keep up appearances for any other kind of authority. And I love his quote, where he says that the only way to be an atheist is to go through Christianity. The best atheists come through Christianity, and that seems to be an undercurrent of a lot of what he's doing. Is like the best way to undermine something is to go through it.
Through it.
And he does it the Rammstein and Nazism, and with Christianity and atheism. which is kind of interesting in a way. He says the best atheists are Christians, which is kind of perverse. It is called the Pervert's Guide. It's a very perverse kind of point of view, um, but it's persuasive as well in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, and I think I mean, that is sort of the ultimate gift of both films is that I think to academics as well as students as well as just the mainstream public who may not be um, in higher ed in any way, uh, that he's he's um, he's pairing up. He's doing what he does the best and what film theory when it's really humming does the best, which is he's using it as a lens to amplify our own conditions. He's saying that these stories are mediated by our own cultural narrative experiences. They're written by us for us, and certainly that everything that goes into breaking up our ideological state apparatuses, as it will, our ideological reason for being,
Hmm.
are all embedded into these artifacts, just like an arrowhead, will tell us a lot about the civilization that made it.
Right.
And so he goes into these films and then teases out of them in very clever ways sometimes, ways that expose our own condition. And he does it really well across multiple eras, and more in this film across more international cinema,
Yeah.
because Pervert's Guide was really, really focusing on Hollywood, and that's great because there's lots there. But um, sort of like the war-weary continent of Europe sure had a lot of interesting stuff to say as well after the 40s and 50s, or during, I should say, post World War II era. And he goes into a lot of that. Um, and I found Perfect Guide to Ideology just almost like nothing had happened in between that and the first film from 2006. It was just a continuation, and I was just as sort of like spellbound, but just as easily lost sometimes too.
Yeah.
He would just go like two or three steps too far into something, and I'd be like, "You lost me,"
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and if I rewatch it, maybe he'll catch me. But for the most part, um, a, a real treat. Again, I
Yeah.
think a real treat.
I agree, and if you're at all interested in the film on first viewing, I think it demands a second viewing because I probably grasped maybe 40 or 50% of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe 60 if I'm being nice to myself. There's a lot there that on a second viewing I'll catch that I didn't catch, right? And I don't think very few people, I should say, will catch all of it. And if you do like it at all, I think it's the way to go. But I think to sum up on these movies, I think that you and I largely agree that the films are overall persuasive.
Yeah.
He does a good job of analysis from a certain point of view, but a point of view that's kind of helpful, useful, almost necessary, and convincing. With maybe a few exceptions or a few, kind of where he goes too far, right? More or
I
less,
think
right?
so. Yeah. Like I remember him, getting on the boat in Jaws and talking about the shark as Brody's. It was so unconvincing that I didn't
Hmm.
even remember it. Do you remember? Yeah. It was like,
Yeah, 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 yeah. And there are. He talks about the shark. I think he's using that as a contrast. He's saying the shark could be anything. He says it could be like, it could be. Um, it's so empty that it could be anything for anybody, depending on the interpretation. I think is part of his analysis there.
I thought he was going to go for the sort of obvious, thing, which was the shark was a threat to capitalism. And it was
Yeah.
that it was simply just going to shut off the economy and so that the power figures like Vaughn, the mayor, and the conspire against the the enforcers of the town, right? The law enforcement,
Hmm.
um, to sort of have them bend to their will, to the ideological apparatus. But he didn't go that way at all. He said something about sort of. I'm like, that's always what Zizek does too. Is like when you think he's going to say something. Oh, Jaws, sure, obviously the shark is a threat to the capitalist structure of the town of Amity Island, which needs those summer dollars, and he didn't talk about that at all. He went completely someplace else with it. And I was like, what?
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
so I don't remember what he said, but I remember going, huh? Like,
Yeah, so there are definitely points of the film where we would say, well, there are better. there are better analyses of the film, or you're missing something, or he's going too far, right? But for the most part, I think we kind of agree that it's pretty useful and thought provoking, and kind of connected to the world. And he's basically showing us how film kind of plays out, sometimes undermines, but mostly plays out particular capitalist fantasies for the most
Yeah,
part, right? And things like that, right?
and with great
So
effect.
yeah, so from there, from these movies, moving to Room 237,
Mhm.
we have another movie in Room 237, which is it's a film that takes, I think it's five or six different people, I can't remember, I think it's five, who have basically obsessed over the movie The Shining. This movie came out in 2013. Room 237 did, and it's these kind of theories and analyses of Room 237 from different points of view, from these people who are clearly, well, I want to say obsessive. That's the word I want to use, but I could say,
I think that's
you
fine.
know, and
That's polite.
yeah, okay. And so watching Room 237, I had a very different feeling than I did watching Zizek. With Room 237, I found myself almost immediately going, "What, really?" You know, and especially the guy who says that it's all about the Holocaust, that the Shining's about the Holocaust. Now, overall, I found the movie kind of charming in a certain way. It was like, it's in some ways it celebrates a certain love of cinema and of
Yes.
movies, and I love that. It's got a good kind of spirit to it. It doesn't criticize these people. It doesn't try to lambaste them, but it also doesn't necessarily support them.
Right.
And it's all told. You never see the theorists, the people with the theories, I should say.
Which is
You
a
never.
smart move.
I think so too. I think so too. The entire film is done in voiceover from the point of view with the voiceover of these people who have these interpretations of the film. And you never see them. There's never like a talking head thing. And then the images are probably 30 or 40% from The Shining, and then the rest is from other found footage or other movies. They talk a
Other
lot about
Kubrick films,
Kubrick's,
yeah.
a lot of other Kubrick films and stuff like that. And then the soundtrack's a little, I think, a little overwrought, in some places where, but
Yeah,
whatever.
too
Yeah,
heavy-handed.
too heavy-handed, and I think the imagery is too heavy-handed in places. But overall, it's like it's nice to see people who are really interested in film and want to like really pick this thing apart, and I totally sympathize with them. But for the most part,
Yeah.
it just doesn't, like, none of it seems to hold. Very little of it seems to hold together at all.
I kept thinking I
Um,
wanted to sit down with those 5 or 6 people and show them Errol Morris's The Umbrella Man
oh, that's interesting.
and
Yeah,
say, "All
yeah,
right, you guys, watch this," and then because I mean, the moral of The Umbrella Man is like, hey, whatever your theory might be about stuff, you can never, like, let's just forget about it
yeah,
because,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's, yeah, I mean, good God, Eric, you keep talking because I have so much to say about this film that I don't know where to begin, and yet
Okay.
ultimately all I'm going to say is kind of the same thing over and over. So it's
Yeah. Well, I'll keep going then, and then I'll respond because I have. So one guy is convinced that The Shining is about the Holocaust, and he keeps obsessing over this number 42. The number 42 is in these various places in the film, and he's going around, finding this number which has some significance to the Holocaust, and he talks about some of the imagery as being like Holocaust imagery, and his theory is that Kubrick like wanted to write a film about the Holocaust, but couldn't. And the only way he could do it was by kind of sublimating it in this film. Another
Mhm.
person had the theory that, and this is a theory that a lot of people know, that Kubrick had a part in faking the Apollo mission footage, the footage of the moon landing. A lot of people think that's fake, and a lot of people think Kubrick had something to do with it. And this other guy's theory is that The Shining is his admission. He admits through encoded ways
Mhm.
that he did help fake the moon footage, and it's all in there in The Shining if you just watch it right,
Right.
right? There's another person who thinks that it's about mythology, and there's a minotaur, and like there's a poster in the background in one of the scenes. It's a skiing poster, but she's convinced it's the minotaur, and she talks a lot about mythology and things like that. There's another person that thinks it's all about the Native Americans, and that almost makes sense because they actually mention Native Americans in there. But like the whole Calumet, I think it's flour, whatever that cornmeal. I don't know whatever it is. She finds Native American imagery everywhere, and it's all about the Native Americans and things like that. Another person has a theory that a lot of it's about time, which I actually agree with. I think the film is about time in a lot of ways, and I could get behind that analysis a little bit, but that also hooks in then again to the Native Americans and stuff like that. So you get all these disparate things, but the way they support their argument or their theories is by this really nitpicky kind of searching for symbols. Like the one that I found, one of the things I found the least credulous. Is that the word I'm looking? That's not the word I'm looking for. Credible, I guess.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Minotaur one. I'm looking at it. I'm like, I do not see a Minotaur here.
No,
you
no,
know.
no. Or
Um,
what about the raging hard on when they two
oh
meet?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's the clear.
Explain that. Explain that.
Oh well, the guy. Which one is he? I lose track of them. Is that Ryan or is that
I
which
don't
one?
even know.
This is the guy that thinks that the movie's about. I think it's the guy that talks about time. I think he says that when the director of the hotel and Jack Nicholson meet for the first time and shake hands, that the inbox of his paper tray becomes
Yes.
a symbol for a hard-on that he has, and he never explains what the hard-on means.
Right.
I think this is the same guy that's talking about the fact that Jack Nicholson's reading a Playgirl, in the lobby.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just, as our dear friend Robert Burgoyne always says, is just sort of like symbol hunting and the manufacturing of meaning when it's not there. It's just simply not
Yeah.
there,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But here's the question, and I don't know if it's too early to go into this or not, but what's the difference between Room 237 and Zizek?
Mm.
And that's what I want to get because
I
I
think
hear that. Go ahead. Yeah,
sanity
go ahead.
is the first component.
Say
I,
say that again. Say that again. Hold on.
sanity.
Sanity. Okay.
Yes, I think these people are all somewhat deluded by the film and that they've obsessed upon it. The film itself, even towards the end, talks about forest through the trees.
Yeah.
The one guy, the guy who has that sort of like compulsive nervous laughter after everything he says, he'll be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
it's 4:30." It's sort of like there's this laughter that is the man who has his son in the background who's asking for attention every now and then. Um, he's saying like he's becoming Jack Torrance and his life is becoming this, and it's like, well, then that should be a signal, that should be a cue that like this is just a film based upon a novel made by a filmmaker. It was a commodity, a product that was put out, shot in England, and on location. It was made, it was thrown out, it made money, end the story. Live your
Yeah.
life enough.
Right.
It's ridiculous. These conspiracy theories for this film. The difference is that for me, there's a difference between honest intellectual textual analysis, right, which is to just basically, like you said earlier, put your ideology glasses on, and look at the powers that shaped and formed the text that you're looking at, and see those articulations of those powers, and to sort of just like indulge in fantasies and try and find things that are obsessive and compulsive in your life and project them onto the text themselves.
No, that's interesting. The projection factor is kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, yeah, each one of these people is obsessed with these topics and they've projected it onto the film.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel like like with intellectual criticism, a la Zizek, you do have a sense that it's hooked into larger, uh, maybe societal, cultural,
Mm-hmm.
economic factors that go into the making of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whereas with this, it's like I have this idea and look at all the stuff I found, and I think the idea is with something like Room 237, it's Kubrick had a secret mission, a secret message that he wanted to put out there because he's a genius and a mastermind and all this stuff, and he wanted to. There's an intentionality there, that he intentionally. Except one guy does talk about this kind of death of the author sort of thing with cultural studies towards the end, but for the most part, there's this idea that Kubrick is intentionally trying to send a message and he's coding it in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with something like psychoanalytic film criticism and things like that, you're saying, oh, no, there are unconscious drives that may have nothing at all to do with the author's intent, the director's actual life, may or may not. It's other forces, and there are ways to read it, and there's a reason for the popularity of certain films based on that stuff as well. And there are certainly analyses of The Shining that do that and do that convincingly.
Sure.
But yeah, these I think are more this kind of, like you said, conspiracy theory. There's this conspiracy that. I don't know if it's a conspiracy if it's one person, but that Kubrick chose the patterns in the rug to mirror the whatever they are, the launch pads of the Apollo mission or whatever. Okay, maybe. I mean, it does look the same, but really.
Yeah.
you
You know,
know
there's the famous old quote, McNamara resurrects it in Fog of War, which is, and I'm paraphrasing, that if you can't get the majority of your peers to see your line of thinking, then
mm,
you should reevaluate your thinking.
yeah, that's an
And
interesting point.
yeah, I mean, I'm not flying in the face of Einstein or Galileo. I'm not saying that, you know what I mean? I'm not saying
Yeah.
that to think an original. I'm saying that if you're analyzing a film and you're about the only person that really sees it this way, the odds are that, you know, however which way you're looking at it, if you can't get peers or even a majority of people to see what you're saying, you might want to re-examine. And when I look at
Yeah.
these film, when I look at the analysis, I mean, this film, the Room 237 is an exercise in polysemy. It's the idea that we all react differently to text. That the sort of like monolithic, classic old, you know, um, hypodermic needle media effects theories of the
Hmm.
20s and 30s are indeed obsolete. That we all bring our own cultural conditioning and our own upbringing and our own sense of self to how we react and interpret film or various iconography in culture. However, whether it's a television series or a newspaper article or a billboard or whatever, we just react differently. And I think the film, is pretty even-handed. As someone who's done a lot of research, not a lot of research, but who's an avid fan of the documentary mode of filmmaking, and I respected the director for really taking the sort of anti-Trekkies approach to this.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
did not really try to poke fun at these individuals. I mean, there's that one shot when I don't know which one of the people is making a point that seems really incredulous, and we cut back to Jack at the bar saying, anything you say, Lloyd, anything you say, he's saying to the
Hmm.
bartender. And that seemed to be about really the most obvious cut that I could see, evidentiary cut
Oh,
where
I get it.
like, you know, and and that was about it. I mean, the director could have had a lot more fun with this than he did. He treated them with respect, really, and let them tell their theories. Um, and kind of they hung themselves with their own rope. I'm not trying to offend the people in this film, and when I made the crack earlier about sanity, that was being sort of hyperbolic. But
Yeah.
I would also say that I do not see what they're talking about, and I've probably had more formal training in analyzing films, and I'm probably more familiar with the films of Kubrick. And a lot of the things they say are patently false about Kubrick. They just
Mm.
don't know the man's work very well. Um, they should go back and reevaluate his cinema. I think the one guy who made the point about how he was a genius who was bored by the time he made Barry Lyndon was right on the money. I think
Yeah.
he was accurate about that.
Yeah.
But that's as far as the truth telling goes with all these things. These people have kernels of truth in what they're saying and then extrapolate it out to conclusions that I just can't buy or at all, at
Right.
all. You know.
Yeah, I agree. The movies of his that come up the most in the film are Eyes Wide Shut and probably Full Metal Jacket, I think. Someone mentions Lolita. Barry Lyndon comes up a few times.
In 2001, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, 2001. Yeah, actually more than Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
2001 comes up now that you mention it. Um, and there are definitely thematic similarities between 2001, Eyes Wide Shut, and The Shining, no doubt, right? And you could do a thematic analysis pretty easily. But
Sure.
like you said, extrapolating beyond that, it gets really dicey. I found a quote from the director of the film,
Hmm.
and he says, my personal take on it is, for one, I don't think it's nearly as visionary as any one of these folks have found. I just see it as sort of a story about juggling the responsibilities of your career and family, and as a cautionary tale of what may happen if you make the wrong choice. And even maybe looking at the ghosts as these figures that represent fortune or prestige or things that you might be chasing at the expense of paying proper attention to your family. That's the Rodney Asher, the director of Room 237's take on it. But that said, I agree with you that he's very even-handed, and I think he's more interested in figuring out, like, having these people tell their stories to kind of document the fascination with this particular movie, but also to document these people's kind of obsessive love of a particular film. And I think it's very even-handed, and which makes it watchable. If he were damning them, or lauding them, I guess I don't think I would have responded as well, because believe it or not, I would still recommend this movie. I think it's a fun watch in a way. It's frustrating, but
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
think around the 60-minute mark, it became strictly an exercise in watching it for our show. I just couldn't, I tried hard
yeah,
to take seriously what some of the people were saying, but I found like maybe 10% of the stuff that came out of their mouths might have had some validity, and the other
yeah,
90 was just. I'm
yeah,
not, again, I'm not trying to offend. I just, respectfully, completely disagree
yeah.
with pretty much everything that comes out. It reminded me a lot, and I brought this up this morning in anticipation of because I wanted to read it in anticipation of our podcast. There's a great South Park episode called "Mystery of the Urinal Deuce." Someone takes
Okay.
crap in the urinal at the elementary school rather than in the toilet, and Mr. Mackey gets really upset, and it becomes like a Hardy Boys episode. But at
Oh, that's
one
great.
point, Cartman, who's always trying to destroy Kyle, does a a little mini lecture to the class, and ultimately makes Kyle responsible for 9/11. And I'm just going to read the dialogue here between of the first few seconds about how Cartman tries to, using all the spurious logic, make Kyle the person who was responsible for 9/11. And it starts with him. Cartman says, "Remember, this is going to be hard to do. Remember that there are in fact two towers. 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 equals 11. 2 minus 1 is 1, and 1 and 1 make 11. And there are 9 members on Silverstein boards of direction. That's 9, 1, 1, 9, 11. And take 2 minus 1 plus 9, 11, and you get 12, which leads us all to the mastermind of the 9/11 tax, Kyle." And then Kyle says, "Me?" Cartman says, "Yes. 12 contains the numbers 1 and 2, just like the toilet yesterday where someone went number 2 instead of number 1. Add 1 and 2 and 9/11, and we get 914. Drop the 4, and it's 9/1. Exactly the score Kyle got on his spelling test 12 days after 9/11. Who had the most to gain from 9/11? Kyle, who was nowhere to be found in the morning." So it's that type.
Oh my gosh, that is hilarious.
It's just so funny. And as I was watching, Room 237, I'm like, it's Cartman doing his 9/11 speech.
That is fantastic. Was it done in JFK style or no?
Yeah,
That's
without the great editing, but yeah, I mean,
right.
eventually, but yeah, it was just
Yeah.
kind of a continuous shot of Cartman.
That is fantastic. Yeah, we'll have to link to that in the show notes at that'sarapshow.com. I have not seen that episode. That is fantastic.
So good.
Um, yeah, yeah, I'm interested in kind of interrogating the line between like what's valid criticism, what's not. I think we've done that already, but to me, a lot of the the I don't know, the theories, like I tell students this, I tell a lot of people this, like you have to pass the so what test.
Right.
or the who cares test, I guess. But if you're going on about, oh, I see that there's this number, and 2 times 3 times 7 equals 42, and that's the number, like, there's the so what? Like, who cares? So what? Like that. There comes a point where you're looking at coincidences and drawing connections between the coincidences, which is kind of the mode of analysis or mode of thinking of our age, of the internet age, in a lot of ways. People can make connections between anything. That's why we have, these theories about 9/11 being an inside job, or there's no way it could have collapsed like that, or whatever. And then you can, by just linking disparate pieces of information and extrapolating, you can shed doubt on just about anything and try to prove just about anything. And you know for most of us it's a bunch of bunk, right? um
It is.
and I guess that's the so what thing. It's like, or even the, like, that, when you're doing, like, when I have students do like their film analysis papers, I always tell them, anytime you make a point, or you try to make a point, or anytime you look at something, ask yourself, so what? Like, why does the reader care about this?
Hmm.
And if it's not evident, explain why, or get rid of it. Because there has to be some kind of link to some real, like, interpretation or analysis that actually would make sense, and you could argue. Um, and this room 237, most of it, like you said, is an example of people just really just obsessively going too far. And I love what you said in the beginning about projection. They're projecting their own obsessions, especially the Apollo guy. Seemed to be obsessed about the Apollo mission. And and so therefore this is all about the Apollo mission. And you string.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
well, it's sort of like it's also an exercise in, like, when something is exhaustively researched, doesn't necessarily mean that it's intellectually rigor at the same time. um,
Right.
and but the thing that is kind of confusing about that is, wasn't one of them a professor, though? That's the and I think it was the Holocaust studies.
Okay.
I can't remember, but I
You might be.
thought,
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, you might be right. I'd forgotten that.
yeah,
Yeah.
which kind of just, I don't get.
Yeah, and he's the one that I found least convincing.
I just I just don't see that the Holocaust connection, apart from some very sort of loose, where you can take a look at anything and make a connection type of thing. And um, yeah, it's sort of like, ultimately, yeah, your so what question leads to my ambivalence about their interpretations of the film. Um, it's just because I just don't find it to be reasonably argued. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's the problem here, is that, um, and kudos to the director for not, I mean, in a couple of the reviews I read, I saw that a couple that they thought the film was sort of like, um, intentionally trying to freak show these people. And I
Hmm.
didn't get that. I
No, I
mean,
didn't
I've
get that
watched a
either.
lot of documentaries that fall along these lines,
Yeah.
and I think there are far more egregious uh, acts of filmmaking out there that do that, than this. I thought this
I
was,
agree.
like we
Yeah.
talked about earlier, pretty even-handed. I think they ultimately kind of like, and I hope, I don't know, they might be too blind to see it, but I think ultimately the public think that their interpretations are, um, just simply not reasonable. I don't
Yeah.
think a reasonable person is going to buy these analyses.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But on the other hand, I think people who consider themselves reasonable would also reject Zizek out of hand, saying that he's overreading, or
That's probably true as
overanalyzing.
well. I guess
Yeah.
you could make a stronger argument for Zizek, just in the sense that, I don't know how to say it. He seems to have more public and intellectual capital
Hmm.
than, and so if we put any faith in our institutions, then, and that's a big if we put any faith in our
Yeah.
institutions, then perhaps what he's saying should have more resonance than
Yeah.
what, somebody, without the credentials and or publications and or, intersubjective, um, sort of policing would say.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's a bit kind of an appeal to authority in a certain way. But I
It
do.
is, it is,
But
yeah.
yeah.
But I don't
And
know what else to appeal to.
yeah. Yeah.
Why
No, I'm
else do we
not.
have authorities on the matter?
Yeah. I'm not unsympathetic to it. I just, but there's a certain like, well, we believe him because he's big and he's part of the
Yeah.
institution.
Well,
Well, maybe the institution's the problem too, just to
well,
play
like
devil's
the
advocate,
doctors tell you that like they did all this training. They went to, they did it at undergrad. They went to grad school. They went to med school. 10 years of this practice and stuff, and then every patient comes in, with
Mhm.
files of internet information saying this is what I have, and so that
Yeah.
sort of strips them of their power,
Hmm.
to what they, invested all this money and time into. And so when you say that I'm kind of, it's an appeal to authority, I don't know who else to appeal to there, I
Yeah.
guess.
I think one of the differences too. I mean, I'm not unsympathetic to that appeal at all. But I mean, there are a lot of people in this country who will, who are very anti-intellectual, who will say
True.
because he's part of the academy,
Oh,
we
the
can't be
academy,
trust,
can't
he can't
trust
be
him.
trusted because it's the liberal academy and all that stuff, right? And so that it can go the opposite way. I think part of it though too, part of the power of Zizek, he's using a particular theoretical framework to look at a lot of different popular movies and other cultural phenomena, whereas these people are looking at one movie obsessively to try to pull meaning out of it. You know what I
This is
mean? They're
true.
trying to make theories out of a movie. He's using theories to elucidate and interpret movies.
This is
Is-
true.
You know?
Zizek uses as his base, the philosophies of a lot of great thinkers, people that are again accepted from by
Hmm.
authorities to be great thinkers, regardless of what we may think about Freud or something like that. It's like
Hmm.
he was one of the more radical personalities that changed the world, or the way how we look at the world, I should say, or Darwin or Marx or anybody really. And I don't get that sense from the interpretations in Room 237. That's where I was
Yeah.
saying it was like exhaustively researched without any intellectual rigor.
All right.
Therefore, it's hard to just swallow any of this stuff. And I think that's the general reaction that everybody had to the film who watched it, and that is why these guys really need to re-examine their thinking. But I don't
Yeah.
think they will because they're too
Oh no.
obsessed
Of
with
course. Yeah.
convinced they're right, and like they just can't see why we wouldn't think so. I can't say that for everybody in the film. I mean, if one of them was in front of me right now, he'd say, "No, I respect your point of view," but this is definitely how I see it.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, yeah, no, I agree with you on all of that. I like your WebMD kind of analogy where, you know, you go on the internet and WebMD and all of a sudden you've got like 10 different diseases, and
Well, it's so
I
dangerous. I mean, we all
know.
need to go into the doctor's office prepared. We should
Yeah,
do our own research.
yeah,
That's just good. It's just the problem is because we it's our bodies.
yeah,
We're not detached from them like the
e-
doctor is. That
exactly.
we get obsessed and start immediately sort of like worst case scenarioing everything.
Yeah,
And but I mean, we should go in with some knowledge. I think it's just we take it too far, and we sort of
yeah.
like we strip the physician of their authority, by saying you're wrong. I clearly have this.
Right, 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 exactly. So yeah, I would. I think these are examples. These are two good, and this is why I wanted to put them together. Because when I first brought the subject, you were like, "I want to advise against looking at Room
Oh yeah,
237."
I was totally like, are
Yeah,
you kidding me? We want to talk about Room 237?
yeah, and you were like, "I've heard bad things about it, right?"
Yeah, well, I had watched like the first few minutes when the guy was talking about going to see The Shining in Leicester Square, and
Uh,
and then when he's like Native Americans, I'm like, all right, I'm out of here. And then
yeah.
I haven't visited since. And then, but when you said, but what a wonderful foil the two
Hmm.
will be, if we pair that with Zizek, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
that's
you were. It was funny because you were immediately on board. I was like, "That's precisely why I want to talk about it." And you're like,
yeah,
"Oh yeah,
I
okay, cool."
yeah, I didn't know. I thought, yeah, I was thinking something completely the opposite of what
No,
you were saying.
it was
And
great.
I'm like, oh, okay. As a compare and contrast, you can't do any better than this because the films are both about textual analysis,
Right.
both of them.
Mhm.
One with a sort of like undisciplined approach, then the other with a ultra highly disciplined approach. And so what
Right.
could be, you know?
Yeah, So I think they serve as great examples of what we might consider. Well, you just said it. Yeah, I'm not going to elaborate on what you said. You said it perfectly, actually. Um, and so I would invite listeners to defend 237 or attack Zizek in the comments at that'sarapshow.com, or even better, come up with other movies that you know of that do interesting film analysis, because I know there are others out there, but I would love to know about them and hear about them. So if anyone has other films that do similar things, let us know in the comments at that'sarapshow.com. Or if you want to defend 237, tax Zizek, whatever, that's rapshow.com. Hit us in the comments. You can follow us on Twitter as well and all that at Rap Podcast. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you, because we're certainly not the final voices on this topic, but we
No.
do have pretty strong opinions about about the whole thing. So
Sure.
you know. And if you haven't seen the films, go watch them. They're instructive in certain. They're both instructive in certain ways. You
Yep,
know.
and both sitting right there on Netflix for you. Well, Pervert's Guide to Cinema is not, but
Yeah, Perfect Guide to Ideology is,
is.
and they're both worth worth taking a look at. So.
I'd add that right after I finished watching Room 237, immediately afterwards it said you might like this, and then up
Hmm.
came an image for the film Cropsy, which I had seen and read about before, and I'm like, it was like 1 o'clock, and I thought, oh, what the hell? I clicked, it was like 90-minute movie, something like that. Clicked it and watched the whole thing last night.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, yeah. I stayed up to about 3:30 watching Cropsy, which I
Any good?
really, yeah, I thought it was fantastic. And so anybody who is hearing this, yeah, it's a random recommendation from me because it came up right after, you might also enjoy this movie, and I did. So it's a documentary, and I'll tell you about it later, Eric.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah. I saw it on Netflix too. It says you might like, but it was time to go to bed.
Right.
But for me, cool. Yeah, that's great. That's good. That's good. I'll check that out. Yeah, this is a good discussion. Next week, hopefully, or next time, Chris will be back with us
Hmm.
for whatever it is that we're going to talk about. But in the meantime, I'm Eric Marshall,
And I'm Nick Schlegel.
and you've just listened to episode number 24 of That's a Wrap. Thanks for listening. Boom, 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 boom. All right, cool. I'm going to hit stop here.